I get to go to this meeting. I get to work in this place. I get to do the budget. That makes me trust it. And I think in healthcare, we have loaded it up with got to and have to conversation. When subconsciously we're creating this victim, I don't control my own destiny. My takeaway is change got to and have to's to get to.
So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with Michele, Quint Studer, and Gina Temple. So I'll just, for people who don't know either one of them, Gina's been on the podcast a couple times. I'll start out with Quint, only because Gina's been on the podcast a couple times. Quint is now co-founder of Healthcare Plus Solutions, author of 15 books. I can't even do one, so congratulations. I look forward to reading the most recent one. Quint, I met Quint. Quint didn't meet me, but I met Quint back when I worked at Sutter Health when he was brought in to do some work with the organization. So I'm thrilled to death to have you today and the conversation between you and Gina. Gina is the president of CommonSpirit St. Francis Hospital and St. Francis Hospital Interquest in Colorado that has snow. So welcome to both of you. And I know the two of you have a history, and that, Gina, you've been on the podcast and talked about Quint, that the hospital, when you were a young nurse, Quint was, I think, the CEO.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Back in 1997, I walked into Baptist Hospital and got to really observe Quint's leadership. And I was, again, a trauma nurse specialist. And that experience, absolutely, it changed my life. And I never thought I would ever leave the bedside. But what Quint and that team did, they created an environment where that's where I wanted to be. I never wanted to leave there. And they included me as a frontline staff member. And Quint was so visible, and his town halls were so moving and included us. And he really created that top-down, bottom-up approach to organizational change and a cultural shift. And again, I'm your biggest fan, Quint, and just I've been looking forward to today and having the opportunity to speak to you and tell you thank you. Thank you, sir, for what you've done for healthcare, not just in the United States, but globally. You're amazing, sir.
Well,
I love it.
People never agree on this. Who should be thanking who?
I think there's plenty to go around. Gina, you're going to kick us off with a quote, and then we'll have a conversation around all things leadership journey or whatever else comes to mind.
Well, the quote, I'm actually going to quote Quint, who said, "Culture outperforms strategy every time, and culture with strategy is unbeatable."
I love it. So what are your thoughts on that, Quint or Gina? Either one. Go ahead, Gina.
Well, I would just say what I found out as I transitioned into leadership and spent time really studying Quint and his evidence-based leadership model. In fact, that's what my dissertation, I wrote it on, was the impact on staff. Quint is absolutely brilliant. Whenever he took that, the pillar structure, created goals, and he created an environment that was relentless in the pursuit of clinical and operational excellence. And he did it in a way that was so inclusive and was able to sustain the gains. And the culture there, just to share with you, when I went into the emergency department, Quint had made it his mission in life that we were there to build relationships with that precious, needy community. They needed us so desperately. And so the way that we started talking with that patient population was a way that it was very respectful. It was very inclusive. But in short order, we took our patient perception from the 12th percentile to the 99th percentile with a waiting list just to work with us. It goes back to the 9 principles and the 6 must-haves. And Quint's model helps to create that culture that's everlasting. That's what I would say, Quint.
You know, it's interesting you say that, and Quentin, I want to hear from you, is when you talk about that, Gina, people may take the phrase of operational excellence and just think it's about the machine that's doing the stuff. But what you call out, and I know Quint with your stuff, it's about the humans that are doing the work, right? So the respect just wasn't about the people within the ED out to the patients that we served. the respect was across the organization for each other, how we engage with one another. And that stuff, you can't, it's unstoppable when you get people that feel it in their bones, in their soul, that this is the stuff and this is how we show up. And it's powerful. Quint, what's on your mind, sir?
No, I love listening to Gina. I think one of the things that's really neat is when you feel excited for other people's success.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a coaching tree. And it's always exciting to see, these little pebbles in the pond that are all throughout doing good work. I'm gonna go way back, way before even I met Gina. And I think it was really interesting. And when Modern Healthcare years ago used to say, what's on people's CEO's to-do list? And at the time, I was in Chicago and getting ready to move to Pensacola. And, our to-do list was really developed by what was going on in our organization. We couldn't get people to work in the inner city of Chicago. Patients, couldn't stand us. Insurance companies wouldn't do it. So you might say, well, Quint, why'd you go to work there? Well, sometimes I don't have an MBA or an MHA or any of that stuff. And they were willing to give me a job as a COO. And when we went there, started to do all the normal stuff you do.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff you do wasn't solving some of the issues. Managed care contract, vertical integration, all good things. So, we got real lucky, and Southwest Airlines had come to Chicago, and we were at Midway Airport, and I went over because and I asked them what they were doing, and the couple there had written the book Nuts, Southwest Airlines, and they happened to be there, and we just started talking, and it hit me. This thing was all about making sure the employees had a great place to work.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's sometimes really hard as an executive to just ask the question, what can I do for you?
Mm-hmm.
It's better because people are afraid. Oh, they're going to ask for things we can't provide. A little bit, but not much. Nurses are going to ask for a few more blood pressure cuffs. They're just going to ask for realistic things. And we started doing it. And not only, and then the other stuff started moving because we had now built trust,
Mm-hmm.
authenticity. So we built trust, and then the other stuff started moving, and we called it single focus, multiple results. And so that's really what tricked it. But then the other thing is, like, we were talking about who should be thanking who. I mean, it's very common to talk about purpose and all that, but in healthcare, sometimes we can get lost because we got so much going on. We've become transactional. And I think over the last 5 or 6 years, particularly, we've moved from relationships to transactions. And I'm okay with transactions. I'm okay with the text message telling me to do something, but it can't completely replace relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So, my story is I sort of got lost too. When I got to Chicago, I'd heard to be a CEO, you needed to do all these things. And all of a sudden, one day I got a letter from a gentleman whose father had died at our hospital. And he told me the story about a nurse who had held his father's hand get to the hospital. And when he got there, the nurse was still in the room, said, your father loved you very much. I also found out the nurse's shift had ended. So she was now volunteering, but she couldn't leave. And at that moment, I felt the purpose that, sometimes we get lost. The environment, things get lost. So, yeah. So, and now we're, it's sort of interesting. And, now whatever we call something, it doesn't matter what we call it. It's what we do. We say, I call it this, we'll call it that. Now we're calling everything human experience. Well, it's still going to be, people are going to still judge us, not on the term we use, but how do they feel about this? And my whole goal is still to create places where people say, I belong here. I imagine myself working anyplace else.
I'm sitting here bobbleheading, and I know you are too, Gina, because it's powerful stuff. And you say it, Quint, like it's super easy to do. And on one hand, I agree with you. I agree with the feeling, the sense that I have that it's easy to do. On the other hand, I think it can be super challenging for leaders that have a different narrative running in their head about what they should and should not, or can and cannot do?
I think well, because we're all different. And I think, for example, people that are now working with Gina, they're gonna learn from her role model.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what we say and how we say it. But I think the other thing we're faced in healthcare, particularly right now, is the inexperience. And I think we've been underestimating the experience level. So I'll talk to a CEO and I'll say, you probably got 25 to 27% of your leaders and lead managers, supervisors going to have less than 3 years experience. And I never, with the CEO, I never want to look like I'm embellishing. So I always go a little bit lower than I think. And they'll say, oh, I don't think ours is that high. And then they'll ask human resources and they'll come back and say, oh my gosh, it's 56%, 63%. And these are good places, Michele and Gina knows it. These are not bad CEOs.
Mm-hmm.
These are just CEOs that COVID came in and took a lot of their leaders retired.
Mm-hmm.
Their nurses went to outpatient.
Mm-hmm.
So then we look at, if you got managers, let's say 40% of your managers are relatively new. And then if you look at employees, especially inside the hospital now, Gina, we did some studies at hospitals recently. And so there are some nursing units now where the most experienced nurse on the unit has 2 years experience.
Oh,
And some of these are in the ICU right now. And again, so how do we develop people has to be looked upon differently than we could. And I'll go on with this. What we have found is you want to provide the skills, but you also don't want to make it so overwhelming that they think I can't do this.
mm-hmm.
You got to learn to narrow the scope of what we're asking managers to do and make it doable and be a little bit patient. So there's research that shows if you want to, there's a correlation between experience and length of stay. So the more experienced team you have, the more efficiently and effectively a patient will move through inpatient care. But if we don't recognize that, we just think fixing a system, managing a process is going to create magic. So what we try to do, or I try to do, is really make a leader realize we're going to support you. We're going to make it work. Because the other thing that happened during COVID is we got all these new people, but they didn't get skill building.
Mm.
And the major skill builder is your boss. It's not the OD department. It's not the HR department. It's teaching people how to develop people. So I was at a meeting last week with people that teach a master's in healthcare administration. My challenge was, are people walking out of your program knowing how to coach and develop people? It's not, can you do a flow chart? Not do you understand this? So I think the people that do better are the people that understand that their main job is to develop talent. And that's why you've been so absolutely successful. And that's why people like Gina, particularly that come from the clinical background, have a natural tendency of this, because they always were. As a nurse manager, you're always developing talent, different levels. Now, not saying that other entities don't, but I think it's more prevalent in the clinical areas to be a developer of talent.
Well, and it depends the focus area of talent. And Gina, you've been, in the nurse end of it, because I think there's proctors and everything else, but they're talking about skills, competencies on the clinical side. And the other part that you're talking about, Quint, is the leadership side and the human relationships and how do I navigate political savvy and emotional intelligence and all that stuff. And I don't think that that's something that clinical people are developing in clinical people, even nurses. I think it's more focused on, and check me if I'm wrong, focused on competencies. Gina, what's your thought?
And, we recently were looking back at employee satisfaction data. And Quint, this isn't going to surprise you. What we found was frontline staff are begging for us to invest in the middle managers. And so, really following Quint's lead, we took our general leadership meeting, we added on an hour. And so every single month, we're doing an educational offering and learning. And we're tying that back to true organizational alignment, the structure you would see from the Baldrige framework, all the things that really made, I believe, Baptist successful in winning or being awarded the Baldrige Award. So the things that I've learned from Quint, I continue today to to go back to the basics.
Mm-hmm.
Makes us authentic leaders, and how do we continue to grow the technical skills that are needed from our managers? They've got the right heart, the right soul.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure that we're investing those tactical operational skills? And it won't surprise Quint, but we have our general leadership meeting this week. I'm teaching the principles and the must-haves. We're going back to the basics, and we have structured our educational learning to even bedside shift report, getting back to safety rounds, all of that. And it goes from now all the way through August. And the key that is so important, it's the GIMBA boards, the process improvement boards, but also the leaders engaging in observation of frontline standard work that we see that makes the difference. But and it can't just be here's a task, I'm going to do it. It's making sure that we tie it back to that purposeful work. What does this mean to that family who, we don't know the diagnosis yet? We're waiting on pins and needles to get that information. How do we provide comfort and getting back to that aspects? But it's all about growing together, being humble, respecting the work that's happened before you arrive, and just building on the shoulders, or standing on the shoulders of the folks that came before it, especially.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're going back to the teachings and the learnings and everything that was foundational for you, that got you interested in being a leader when you just thought you were going to be trauma nurse and this is my lane and this is where I'm going to stay. Quint, you made a comment before we hit record, was about the newest book that you have, and like you were talking about, it's not just about, and these are my words, not yours, but doing the same old thing, right? And we've always done it this way, so I'm going to keep repeating it this way. And you talked about refreshing aspects of what the learning is, or the teaching, or the framework. What stands out for you about what's changed from maybe back when Gina first met you to where you are today, and how you teach and engage with people? What stands out for you?
I was trying to take my work and parallel it with clinical, because people, if you do that, it's not something new. So when Gina mentioned evidence-based leadership, that came from evidence-based medicine.
Mm-hmm.
If we're doing this stuff in evidence and we know this works, there's certain best practices we should do in leadership. So about 3 years ago, I had a heavy dose of precision medicine myself. Cancerous tumor taken out,
Mm-hmm.
they do pathology report, and they then tell you it's called precision medicine. And as I was looking at precision medicine, it hit me that we could take precision medicine and parallel it into how we train and develop people. I mean, try to call it skill building, because Gina, you were right. In the model of care study that's on our website, Healthcare Plus Solution Group website, but we did it with the ANA. Basically, 92% of people want to be invested in today. They want skills being invested in. But how do you do that? So what we're seeing now in precision development, so basically you have a leader, but you almost do an assessment like you would a clinical. So how does the person learn? What's their behavioral type tendency to go on? We also do something that was on a curriculum committee of the Harvard Business School. We take, what are the skills that leader needs for that job? Because everything's a little different. And then you say to them, on a 1 through 10, with 10 feeling you've mastered it, a 1, you really don't, self-rate yourself. And then we have their boss, their supervisor, blindly do the same thing. And then when we get together, they see, are they on the same page? But then the magic of this is, so let's say, Gina, you have a manager who thinks something's really, they're giving themselves a low score on something. But you might say, that's okay. That's not that important right now. So don't worry about that. But this is really important right now. So we might think reward and recognition is important, but maybe knowing how to schedule is even more important, because so many of our managers that got promoted during COVID had never scheduled in a non-COVID world. It's a challenge. So then what we came up with is something called an OSIR, which is, what outcome are we looking for? What skill does the person need? What action can they take? What resources can we provide them? So what we've tried to do, not that group development is still not good, but we try to take it and go, just like healthcare, everybody getting a mammogram is good, but the treatment's going to vary.
Mm-hmm.
And the treatment's even going to be vary if you're diagnosed with breast cancer. So what we're trying to do is minimize or make it more doable. And we have found middle managers, particularly, their anxiety level goes way, way down because we're making this doable.
Mm-hmm.
Even, Gina, you'll like this with things like keywords a key times 8 it. It's overwhelming for some. And it got a bad rep because it's, scripting. So the other thing we try to say, well, how can you do this so it's a natural deal? And because it's really keywords at key times to reduce anxiety. And I'll finish.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got too far away from clinical outcomes with patient experience. Gina knows from our days at Baptist, clinical outcomes were vital. Now, we knew if a patient had their questions answered, they'd be better clinically. We knew if they felt we cared, they'd have less anxiety. The goal wasn't to raise a score. The goal was to provide an environment where a person can get the best clinical outcome. And I actually think the pendulum has swung so far at times to HCAHPS or CCAHPS or patient
Mm-hmm.
experience or human experience that if I work with healthcare, I'm a value-driven person. And if I think it's hospitality, it's a potential optional. If I believe it's going to improve the clinical outcome of the person, I have to do it. So you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned bedside shift report, Gina. So my daughter was recently in the hospital, got great care at Good Sam in Cincinnati, Ohio. And so I asked her what she thought. And do you know what she said? The thing she felt that was the most helpful to her as a patient was the bedside shift report. See, it wasn't about raising an HCAHPS score.
Mm-mm.
Do you know what's happening to your care right now? Do you know what medications you're on? Do you know what your home care? So I think, so when I talked about changing how we develop and build skills, which is rewiring. That was my book, Rewiring Excellence.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we have to bring it all the time back to how this improves the clinical outcome of the patient, even with collecting copays. Gina, if you remember at Baptist, we started collecting copays in the ER years ago, and everybody was real unhappy. Oh my God. But we have to explain, first of all, it's an agreement, they have a copay, but that copay goes to us, allow us to improve clinical care. So I think we can't get too far away from what we're trying to do is improve clinical outcomes. That's why I mentioned lowering turnover is about improving clinical outcomes because an experienced staff. So
Mm-hmm.
so we've taken the same themes, which is service, quality, people, finance, the same themes, just like we use the same type. We want to communicate via phone, but we're not using the same phone. So I think today there are certain technologies that we can use, because the key thing I find in development of any individual is helping them with their self-awareness without
Mm-hmm.
feeling less than. Because I always find we want everyone to be successful. Now, some people can't, but we want to still give them a shot to be successful. So I think relooking, and I think healthcare, to their credit, started saying, we're going to do more training, but it became a little bit more buffalo herd type,
Mm-hmm.
not individuals type. You need both. Buffalo herd's good, but you need to individualize it too.
It's interesting because the buffalo herd, as you call it, for me, it's about level setting the room or level setting the organization, right? So you're gonna create whatever the language, the expectation is. And then the other part of it is, and then you meet people where they're at. So what you're talking about precision is that you may need a different conversation on how to do XYZ, where the bulk of your peers, they're okay with XYZ. So it literally is about meeting people where they're at. And I love that about it. And the other part, Margie Haganey, my mentor, she had a phrase, well, a couple of them, what's a little bit better look like, right? And so to your point, and the other one is today's not the only day, because we tend to think that it's all the stuff and all the stuff has to be done right now. But what a little bit better looks like is, speaking to what you're talking about, is that especially if I'm a leader And I've got this laundry list of stuff because my gap is so much bigger than anyone else. You need to give me way less to focus on than anyone else because I'm literally that far behind. And I need to know, number one, it's possible versus somebody else who's just firing all cylinders and we're just tweaking stuff, right? That maybe I'm going to tweak 2 to 3 areas. So I appreciate that and that call out on it. Gina, how does that approach that Quint's talking about, does it inform you, change anything, align with how you're currently thinking?
This goes back to that authentic leadership. And whenever I hear Quint talk, he always brings it back to the patient, to great care. And as a nurse myself, I want to work in an environment where I know I've got the tools and equipment that I can provide that type of care and go home feeling proud about the care I delivered that day, about the interactions that I had that day. So I get even more excited and to be on this podcast. But one of the things that Quint came in, and I remember being in the town halls, and I was one of the first people, that were hearing, keywords at key times and implementing those. And it gave me the skill I needed to be successful at the bedside, even to do service recovery.
Mm-hmm.
The things I've always admired about Quint, I can remember him saying, we're going to be the best hospital in the nation because we're going to provide the best care. And we're never going to have more money to spend on marketing dollars, but it's all about word of mouth. And he believed in us. And I've always admired how Quint, I believed because of just the way that Quint engaged us, and he shared those incremental wins and we celebrated along the way. And under Quint's leadership, we created something extraordinarily special, and it just, and great memories for me. So again, thank you, Quint.
I love how you shook your head with the copay because that was a great, no, seriously. Oh my God, I don't want to ask for money. They're here, but if you connect the work, and again, going back to clinical outcomes, got a hospital actually in Texas said, can you come talk to the ER nurses because we're really struggling because we got staffing issues, we got an intern manager, and that's why our patient experience is no good. So I went and said, hey, if I came in and I had chest pains, what would you do right now? And they said, we do this, this, and this. I said, if a young parent came in, first child, first earache, what would you do? We do this, this, and this. And I said, well, but what if you were short staffed? No, we'd still do it. If you have an intern manager, what does that have to do with this? See, what happens is I connected to the clinical outcome. So again, if you look at patient experience, and I don't even think you have to use that term anymore. I call it patient care. I said, what we're trying to say, or even what the questions are, it's things like, do your questions answered? Do you understand your medications? Does your pain, information? These are all clinical items. And I think sometimes we just created this whole silo that move patient experience away from the bedside or away from the clinical outcome. And I think it's when we sit in the clinical outcome, you cannot not do it. So when I went to see my surgeon who was going to remove my tumors, I was a wreck. And he said, when you were told you got cancer. See, that's key words at key times. He asked a direct question, how did I feel? And we always tell people the first question you should always ask a patient or a family is, what is your greatest concern or worry right now? Because forget all these 5 questions. And I put some sample questions on Hardwiring Excellence. It didn't mean you had to ask these. It was just, my question I say today, which isn't in the book, is what's your greatest concern or worry? And I said, I'm going to die. Said, well, it doesn't have to be that way. And he pulled out my deal, showed me what level I was in this, which I wish it wasn't what it was at the time, but we had that conversation. Told me he was going to operate, told me about margins, told me about pathology, told me about mutations, told me all these things. Told me how long the surgery would be. And so in a way, he did aid it. He about, my biggest concern, timing, duration, explanation. And then when I got off the exam table, he could tell I was nervous. He put his arms on my arms and said, we're going to get through this together. See, that's what I meant by keywords at key times, not AIDET, or you're going to go to hospital purgatory. Anyway, so I think, and Gina's a natural. I mean, let's talk about Gina. I mean, Gina went from being a trauma nurse, and now she's a successful career, and aren't the people lucky to have her as their CEO right now?
Yes.
Because people want to believe. And so the trust issue, my newest book on trust, Human Margin, shows during COVID, people learned to like their manager better because they saw more.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't learn to like as the senior executives because they didn't see him as much. Reward and recognition was postponed. Skill development was postponed. And they lost the sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
When I go out to do a group, I'll break them into groups. And what used to take 10 minutes now takes 20 because people want to talk.
Yeah.
So it's really what people want is they want to believe in their senior executives. And it's not that senior executives were bad. It's COVID changed certain things. So now they have to rebuild that trust, which is, here's the key 5 trust questions. I trust what they're telling me. I feel they're going to support me. That's sometimes staffing, sometimes resources, or what. They care about my well-being. I feel recognized and I do a good job, and I feel that I belong here. That's the challenge we have right now, is rebuilding that trust, particularly when 50% of our workforce, we haven't had a long time to build trust because they're relatively new.
Yeah, it's I'm again bobbleheading. All the stuff that you're saying is true, and I think part of it too is people need to figure out how to reconnect with people and connect with people initially. Because a lot of times, like, it's the water cooler thing, or you could stop by a cube, and say hi to somebody on the way to whatever. There's a lot of the population that's not on site anymore, that literally is still offshore, off site. And so as leaders, there has to be intentionality around, how do I connect with my people? What are those expectations? I tell people, we go on camera. They're like, I don't like it. And I said, so here's why we go on camera. We're part of the team. And part of the team is, as a team member, our responsibility is to bring energy to the team. And we do that through video when we're remote. So to your point, it's important to have people understand the why behind it. So whether or not you're in healthcare, you're in another organization, it's so important to connect the tasky things, the things that can feel like a checklist, I'm being told what to do, with the why behind why we're doing it, and then ultimately the mission of the organization, healthcare or not. I need to know that what I'm doing is making a difference, and you're just not telling me to do this thing because you want me to do this thing.
You have to connect the dots really well, because sometimes, for example, and Gina, like your thoughts on this with your training and your monthly training, development, skill building, it's all about well-being. So I'll be with a group and I'll say, isn't it great that your organization's investing in you right now, because they care about your well-being, and they know the more skilled you are, the better you'll feel. They would not have connected skill building to well-being if I didn't mention that. Oh, isn't it great that Hope Health here in Florence, South Carolina, has closed down the clinics for one day to bring all 750 people into a room to hear what's going on. And I said, isn't that great? That's called organizational support. That's called your well-being. That's providing reward and recognition. That's because they want you to know this is the place you belong. And by the way, isn't it great that Carl, the CEO, started out sharing all the information in such an open and honest manner? I find we have to help regenerate that. So one of the table activities I do, and Gina, if you haven't done it, this is a good one. I have people, I do 2 real quick ones, icebreakers. Why you working in healthcare in the first place? And that's an easy one. They all can answer that. But then I say, well, why do you work here? Work here. And all of a sudden they start saying stuff they don't say to each other. When I was going through my divorce, this place held me together. My family, this is like, when you hear the magic words, this is like a family to me. Then you've got the culture. And that's a change I've had to make. I
Mm-hmm.
and you should be a great team to now you should have a great family, because COVID changed wording. And
Mm-hmm.
say, I've never had anyone in this table activity say, I love working here because it's a great team. They might say we have good teamwork, but they
Mm-hmm.
were the ultimate thing. And then they start telling these stories. But see, what I'm saying is they don't go to the cafeteria and have that conversation. They
Mm-mm.
shift change. But you have to give them time to talk about the positive things, and it just changes them. You can just see them feeling, wow, I didn't know that. I was just at a Columbia Basin Health Association in Othello, Washington, and it's a federal qualified healthcare clinic that really, most of their are unemployed migrant workers that grow,
Mm-hmm.
garden our crops. And when we turned them loose on why do you work here, it almost brought tears to your eyes. And I think we have to allow people to recognize the positives, because
Mm-hmm.
we're more geared to look at what's wrong, which is natural, and I get it.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So Gina, do you find you have to spend a little more time with all the new people connecting dots today?
Yes, I do. And then just giving them that safe time too, Quint. And I'm going to tell you, I'm going to steal your two questions at the opening of the external leadership meeting shamelessly, but I do find that you have to take more time. And the quote that I referenced that you stated, you have to be very strategic, because when you listen to Quint, he's just such a natural. Um, and I will tell you, if you look at how he prescribes things and how he has timelines around it, and then you don't leave a new tactic until it's hardwired. And how you know it's hardwired? Well, because you've got no fly zone, so your leaders can get out, be with staff to observe what's going on in the moment. I'm in awe whenever I get to listen to Quint again, because he's such a great storyteller. He's such a great coach. This is very timely, and I can't wait to bring it back to my team.
I have to agree. I've taken notes too. I could spend literally all day in the room listening to both of you, but we don't have all day. So what I'm going to say is this to wrap up. Quint and Gina. So I'll start off with Gina. Gina, what is one thing that you'd love people to walk away with around our topic or a conversation from today? What stands out?
It goes back to that authentic leader and wanting to invest in others to bring out the best in them, so that we bring out the best in clinical outcomes and all around environment where people want to work, where people want to be. That's,
Yeah.
that's what I
Thank you. I
wait.
can I can frickin' feel your heart when you're saying those words. So thank you. Quint, how about you?
Listen to how you talk. Do you use the word got to or have to, or do you use the word get to?
Mm-hmm.
Big change in my own leadership over the last years is become real conscious of how I'm talking to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Go and I say, I got to go to this meeting. I have to do this. Basically, in fact, I think I want to change the must-haves to get-haves.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? We don't realize it. When we say the word got to or have to, we sort of become a victim because we don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And when I've been my latest workshops, when people walk out, no matter what the content is, because I always individualize it, the one walk away they have is, whoa, I need to be a get-to person.
Mm-hmm.
Get to do this. I even in the worst of times, you get to be with someone at their most vulnerable time. So
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'd like them to walk away with is start looking at using the word get to. I get to go to this meeting. I get to work in this place. I get to do the budget. That means
Mm-hmm.
trust it. And I think in healthcare, we have loaded it up with got to and have to conversation. When subconsciously we're creating this victim, I don't control my own destiny.
Mm-hmm.
My takeaway is change got to and have to's to get to.
I love it. I have to agree with you. It's one of those things. I have a thing that I say is words matter, and the most important words are the ones we say to ourselves. And so I totally agree with you on that. And I think that the nuance around that is recognize if you don't know where the words need to change, if when you're saying it, it feels heavy and it's weighting you down, change them because they're lies. Because the point is, you do get to, we are blessed and able to go and help and do all the stuff that we want to do. And those other words, the way you change them, move us forward. If the words that you're using are anchoring you back, let go of the anchor so that you can move forward. I completely agree. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I know this took an interesting thing to coordinate and find the right time. I am so grateful to be in the room with both of you. This has been Leadership Soundbites with Michele and Gina Temple and Quint Studer. Please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, have a freaking awesome day. Thank you.